I like to think of myself as an optimist in video games, to look at the positives at every chance that I get. However, I'm also a down-to-earth guy, which means that I know that I'm human and that I have my strengths and weaknesses just as much as anyone else. So sure, in the final video of this trilogy of videos, it's time to reveal my dark secrets to gaming that have given me my fair share of problems with gaming. So to start, the first rule is that I'll be ranking this list based on things that I hate in video games and at how often they appear. The second thing is that this is my opinion, so if you're honestly wanting my opinions to be exactly like yours, I'm sorry, but I can't help you there. No two people in the world can have the same opinions. It's impossible. Besides, I adore being myself and I wouldn't trade myself for anyone. I don't care what people think of me and I love making these videos for my subscribers. And for the third rule for this list, just because I'm hating things in video games does not mean I'm a pessimist. I'm frankly the extreme opposite, a hardcore optimist. And it was actually really hard for me to make this list. The reason I made this list is to prove that I'm just as human as anyone else. No one can get around things that can piss off a gamer. And it's fun to explore those areas about yourself. I think it's healthy for every gamer to acknowledge those dark sides where things just don't get fun. With that, let's finish this trilogy with the top 10 things I hate in video games. I really don't like these, but thankfully they're hard to come by in single player games, which is what I play usually. I really don't like when a video game wants you to pay for an expensive item out of the blue abruptly and then sends you off on a money farming spree. So yeah, World of Warcraft? No, let's not go there. Because I'm extremely analytical, it's a chore for me to decide on which stats to manually choose to level up with in RPGs. It's just draining for me to look over these things in the long run so often in video games. It's not a big deal and I can tolerate them, but I still don't look forward to those overthinking moments. Remember me talking about RNG luck in my top 10 things I don't care about in video games with selective targeting? So, here we freaking go. Ever heard of fake difficulty? Well, selective targeting is fake immersion. Selective targeting is when a video game starts behaving differently towards human players or to those who start performing better. This covers rubber band AI, this covers computers behaving differently towards the player and no one else. This involves the blue shell from Mario Kart where, like the last entry, targets the front player. And even moments where something acts differently when your camera doesn't and does have a view of it. Admit it, you've seen those moments where video games were trying to be sneaky, but you caught them in the act. Thus, fake immersion. Now don't freak out, and I don't hate these games, but it's genuinely getting harder for me to get into Mario Kart 64 or the later Mario Kart entries. With Mario Kart 64, you know how you have those two racers that hug your butt the whole time? As I get older, that gets more and more annoying, and it gets harder for me to enjoy it. With the later games, the blue shell is starting to become more prominent, and I really wish that like Super Smash Bros. You can turn off some of those items, because it just sucks the fun out of the experience, you know? Now, while I consider myself a patient person, that doesn't mean I'll mindlessly tolerate everything that gets thrown at me. Believe it or not, I am human, and certain things that drag out will get on my nerves sometimes. And in this case, it's extremely long and drawn out levels without enough variety. This needs to be specific. I'm talking about when the level design doesn't change, when the monsters don't change, when the gimmicks don't change, or when nothing changes enough that gives the level justice. This is like the difference of a long run and a marathon. I'm not a fan of watching watching one event roll on and on and on when it comes to a long run. I'm more of a marathon guy. I prefer more activities or change of pace, or else my attention span will start wearing thin. Now, there are some exceptions, like for example with the end of Kingdom Hearts or those games that mash all of the game's environments into one level or boss rushes, because there's enough variety happening on screen and enough for your eyes to go around. I'm talking about those moments where it's just one environment, the same enemies, using the same abilities, and then add the cherry on top with a large amount of minutes, and you know what? No, I don't find those highlights in my video games at all. Just keep them away. Now I'm going to reveal what gives me the most involuntary infuriation in video games. It means I can't control how much it angers me, it just does and always has been since my childhood. And what is this mystery annoyance? Helplessness that can lead to certain death or failure. This includes flinching, knockback over pits, some serious status effects in RPGs, extremely unplayable moments, and escort missions as a few examples. But here's the big difference to what you may be thinking. If there is some degree to prevent bad things happening, that's not what this entry is about. For example, Resident Evil 5 with its AI system. As much as the questionable AI can get you into trouble, at least it doesn't lead to an automatic death, or it can be prevented, so it's tolerable. I'm talking about those moments where you're backed into a dead end no matter what you do, and the game is going to nail your neck to the wall and let you bleed until you die and get your game over screen. And I have to ask, why do games do this? Why give you the chance if you're not going to give the player a chance at all? Thankfully, and very thankfully, these things are very rare to happen, but when they happen, well, you're not likely to forget having a torture session placed on yourself, right? Now, there are two versions of this problem that comes up in video games that'll irritate some more than others. Ever heard of hand-holding? It's when a game goes deliberately out of its way to walk you through every small step and it'll come off as condescending. Me, I don't really care. As long as progress is being made in the video game, then I don't mind the game slowing down a bit. Now, for the other side, I have a big problem with. This is when a game tells you nothing at all and just expects you to go out into the big wide world, breathe it in and say, "We're going to go on a wild goose chase adventure and you should be pumped for it." I can understand why players can enjoy these experiences like The Legend of Zelda from the NES, but I'm just not built to like when these games take exploration this far. This is because of this reason. I don't like strategy guides when I have to resort to them. I really don't. To me, strategy guides is the biggest pace breaker for me for a video game because it literally takes you out of the game to go find out how to fix the problem, especially if it does it often. Now, I know someone will say it's the hours of going out into the world and discovering stuff that makes it so fulfilling, but not for me. Because here's the thing with me and my personal preferences. I want a game where I can see a means to an end. Meaning, I need to see a decent level of progress or it'll become a game breaker for me. So you see the lose-lose situation here? I don't like strategy guides because they take me out of the experience. And then if I don't use one and go to a game where it's designed to be too obscure, I'm not making progress. And that's a real bummer. Then that takes me out of the experience. So you see the problem? Either way I flip the coin and look at this, I'm pretty much sentencing myself to an inevitable misery if I do, misery if I don't situation. So I can't enjoy these games too much. You could, but I can't. This pet peeve started with World of Warcraft because it happens all the freaking time and started to bring out my inner hatred for it in gaming. When enemies become too much of a hassle to kill. Now don't get confused, I'm not talking about those once in a while damaged sponge enemies or the occasional damaged sponge boss. Those are just the standards that just crop up in video games because they do happen. Bosses sometimes do take a while to kill. No, I'm talking about the common grunts being a hassle to kill. This is especially true in the end game of RPGs where it could literally take 5 whole minutes just to get a little experience boost from this common grunt you killed. But not just that, I'm talking about retreating enemies, World of Warcraft. I'm talking about health regenerating or healing enemies. I'm talking about enemies that call for reinforcements, or when enemies pull out the special move that just drags the battle on. When those stalemates bring the game to the pace of a freaking caterpillar, and especially with these battles happening for 5 minutes with every common enemy, it gets tiring, it gets draining, it drags out grinding, it drags out save files, and overall, ho 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 ho. Forgive me, but this is going to be a long entry, but it does need a lot of explanation to get my point across, and it's controversial, so here we go. Now we're back to my novel writing entry once again. It came up for the like list, it came up for the don't care list, and well, what a wonderful way to bundle the basket in with the hated entry. Well, as for anyone when they become a hardcore fan of something, naturally things are going to get on your bad side a lot more than the usual person, because it's something you have a passion for, and you have those expectations. Boy, oh boy, what could it be? Actually, it's 2 things. First, I said in my like list that I appreciate that modern games are getting more into cutscenes, because I'm a novel writer. I like when these things happen, thus my guilty pleasure. But I expect video games to keep that promise to the very end. If you're seriously going to make a story, I implore that the game to carry it out all the way to the end. That's right, it's lazy endings. I kid you not, if I see video games carry out a story from the beginning, build it up to an amazing amount of details and plot, and then they pull the simple, that's all folks, as the ending because the developers got lazy and wanted to tie things off quick, I freaking lose it. Putting in all those hours of story and characters and plot to get a simple 1-minute ending saying, well, happily ever after, then the credits roll. No, don't you even dare, game. Especially Amnesia endings. Oh, don't go there. Now for the second reason, it's going to sound odd, and that's because I've read so many books that this cliche is getting sickeningly old in them. But gamers probably don't notice it because there is the chance they don't read books as much as I do. When the shock value comes without enough character development, and I emphasize enough, which means the game could have some, but not enough. Have you heard the controversy that jump scares are cheap ways to get a reaction out of people in horror games? This is the same way I feel with shock value when it comes to stories. To just put in something shocking for the sake of getting a reaction out of players. Sometimes games do get shock value right if there is enough feelings for the characters and world that I'm in. But if I start feeling I'm not invested enough, like if they gloss over a lot of characters to know more about them or don't show me enough of the world, I'm sorry, but I just don't feel it. If the game doesn't show me a reason to care about my characters or world by the time the shock value thing happens, why should I care if the story doesn't want me to care? Alright, all jokes aside, I do enjoy violent video games a lot. So when I see someone else mindlessly killing people like I do in video games, just like with Kefka, it's hard to have those feelings because I do it too. I kill people a lot in video games as well. I have a confession to make. I get lonely easily. I cannot function without other humans around, which is kind of ironic because I consider myself an introvert. But still, if I had to live in an apartment by myself, or if I happen to get isolated in a mountain cabin, I get worried, and then I need to go out on a daily basis to be around society or in public places. It's how I am. So it gets really depressing for me whenever I see too much wildlife with too little civilization in my video games. And this even includes when there are other players or NPCs with me. Now, I understand the appeal. You're in nature. You get to appreciate the beauty of it and explore the huge, vast world that you're in, and that's awesome. Go out there and enjoy it, and don't let me stop you. That's more power to you to get immersed into it, and they're really great games. They really are, but I can't. I know it's stupid, it's a video game, it's not happening in real life, but think about it this way. These kinds of games are designed to make you forget that you're on the couch playing your game and being in the world that you're in, right? So, when I start forgetting that I'm on the couch in my house surrounded with people in real life and I start getting sucked into this world with a ton of wildlife, with too little people around, I honestly start to get really uncomfortable. And that's how immersion works, to leave one world and enter another. And well, start putting me into a world where there isn't enough human activity around in these nature-filled worlds, I'm going to feel alone, and I don't like that. So when I go into this entry, listen closely to what I'm going to say. There are two types of pace breakers in video games. The first deals with speed when it switches suddenly, usually dealing with underwater levels, and you know what? Case closed, because you know there's no explanation there. Those suck for some video gamers. However, the mechanics are still essentially the same in most cases. It's just the slowing down is usually the problem. While that is a type of pace breaker that bothers gamers, it doesn't bother me personally, but the other one does a lot. The second one is when the core gameplay mechanics, and listen closely because I said the core gameplay mechanics and not the speed, drastically change to a pace that is for the worst. I'm talking when you see this awesome gameplay style, then it suddenly drags its feet in terms of pace compared to the first one you know about. I'm talking sluggish vehicle sections, extreme ability loss, forced and specific stealth sections with irritating rules when the controls just overall get jittery or dumbed down. I hope you understand what I mean in describing these two differences, because it's the mechanics that bother me, not the speed. Lastly, and I think I better mention two more changes of pace that bothers me, but it's not as extreme as the mechanics one. When the game pauses too often, like for example with Okami, where it constantly stops time to draw on the screen, and another, when animations draw out way more time than they should, like for example when you get knocked down in Secret of Mana. I can't play games like these because I'm picky with fluidity in my video games, and stopping the game this abruptly and often halts my enjoyment of these games. Now here's a topic I bet is the last thing you'd think that you'd hear in a countdown. Choreography. Yes, I'm talking about dancing and practicing dance moves. Now I want you to pretend that you aren't good at dancing, and if you aren't, then sweet, you don't have to pretend. When you learn new dance moves, it's tedious, it's hard, it strains your concentration, and it takes possibly hours of practice. Now, translate this to video games. I call these checkpoint chokehold choreography moments, or CCC moments. That's a mouthful. You've done this before and it sucks. You reach a checkpoint and then you reach an impossible section of the game, possibly even borderline unplayable, and then feeling your blood rise up high as you lose over and over and over and over and over and over again, you start to choreograph. You start to weasel and inch your way closer to the next section by inventing patterns to make progress out of desperation, begging mercilessly for the torture to end as you keep losing as you desperately try to keep your sanity. Hey, I never said that the problems on this list happen exclusively to me and only I think they suck. This could happen to everyone, and everyone thinks these suck. So, there's tedium in every video game, which is fine. I can deal with that. But when the cards turn and we're playing with unplayable odds, not cool, game. Not cool.
Unless you never miss a shot with your bow, this fight is damn near impossible without the magic meter upgrade. On at least 3 of my playthroughs of Ocarina of Time, I played through the entire game without the magic upgrade, right up to Ganon's tower, and it was perfectly manageable. But when I got to the Ganondorf battle, it was only a matter of minutes until I ran out of magic for the light arrows, including the refills at the bottom of the room, and I had to force myself to die. This is the same problem as the Boo Beam trap from Mega Man 2, and I seriously don't know why no one complains about it here. In all of these playthroughs, I tried this at least twice, usually more, before I gave up and just got the magic meter upgrade. To this day, I have never beat Ganondorf without it, and if a boss in one of the greatest games ever made can ruin my experience by making me interrupt my adventure to go acquire something that was supposed to be optional, that's an accomplishment, and not a good one.
Now this one comes the most out of underrated video games I play, unfortunately, and frankly this is also the entry that's the hardest for me to explain what bothers me about it. The first reason is because it bothers everybody, and I mean everybody will have a problem with this at one point or another. Or the second reason is because it's so stinking subjective from person to person that it's impossible for anyone to explain properly. Okay, enough with the suspense. It's when game mechanics aren't progressing fast or satisfying enough. Now, you know those guys who say that Call of Duty isn't progressing fast enough and automatically stereotype it as a watered down repetitive shooter? I was one of those idiots when I was younger. Except it was a generational issue. I seriously thought at the time that all the retro games I played at the time when I was younger were automatically great video games, and I had a severe bias towards the modern video games back then because they were running out of ideas. Yeah, watch Mojo Troll comment. I know. Now let's take a step back for a moment. Everybody has this demon inside them. It might or might not be Call of Duty or a generational problem with you, but there are some games out there that will feel so repetitive with you that you will wish that some games will mix it up a bit. Again, it's so subjective that it's hard to pin down when these things happen to you. They just do, and it happens randomly. Besides, it's a natural process and everybody has their taste in video games. You just can't get around that. So why did I put this on the list when it bothers everyone? I used to be bloody sick of it. True, I think the rewards of finding cool underrated game far outweighs the possible bad games you could come across with this entry. But I've been doing it for so long that I feel a little piece of me die inside when I find games that don't do anything unique or anything to stand out. When game designers don't put in enough advancing mechanics to make their games stand out, that's just it. They just blend in with other similar games. And it sucks when it happens. Remember when I said this in my like list? I retired from video games since 2007. Well, after you play a lot of video games, and I mean a lot of video games, some patterns are going to come up where you've generally seen it all. This is why I retired from video games for a few years. Thankfully, I've gotten back into them, but there was a point in my life where I couldn't for the life of me take it anymore. So much so that I stopped playing them for 3 years straight. I can tolerate it a lot better nowadays since I'm older now, and I've come out of video game retirement, but yeah, this was big at one point in my life. So that's why I put it at number 1 in the list. It may not bother me now, but I consider it worth remembering when I did have those problems with it because it's a part of me, and I want to accept that. You need to acknowledge those miserable times to understand what makes you a happy video gamer now. To appreciate the good, you have to appreciate the bad. One more thing I need to stress before I close. This happens to me randomly, meaning it could be any game at any time. So I'm not blaming this on a series as a whole being too repetitive. For example, with Pokemon, I found Generation 4 to be way too repetitive and through the motions more than any other Pokemon game. With Call of Duty, to me, it's Call of Duty Ghosts. Just know, that is where repetition hell is born.